Did I ruin everything by choosing my dream over my boyfriend's reputation? I spent 6 months planning the perfect celebration, but it took less than 3 hours for everything to fall apart, and now everyone thinks I'm the one who ruined it. I remember the exact moment I decided to throw myself the birthday party I had always dreamed of. It was a cold evening in March, and I was sitting in my tiny apartment, scrolling through pictures of vintage celebrations with their warm amber lighting, vinyl records spinning in corners, and people dressed in bell-bottoms and platform shoes. I had always loved the 70s aesthetic, the music, the fashion, the carefree spirit of it all. This year I told myself would be different. This year I would celebrate properly. The problem was my work schedule. I had taken on seasonal employment that paid well, but demanded everything from me during certain months of the year. My actual birthday would fall right in the middle of my busiest period, when I would barely have time to sleep, let alone host a party. So I made a decision that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. I would postpone my celebration by 2 weeks, giving myself enough time to finish the demanding work period and actually enjoy the party I had been dreaming about. 6 months of planning began that night. I created spreadsheets, Pinterest boards, and shopping lists. I researched authentic 70s recipes, spent hours curating the perfect playlist filled with disco, funk, and soul music, and slowly collected decorations, lava lamps, string lights with warm bulbs, vintage posters, and colorful streamers. Every spare dollar from my paychecks went into a special savings account I had labeled Dream Party Fund. My boyfriend was supportive, or at least he seemed to be. He would nod along when I showed him decoration ideas and occasionally offer suggestions about which of his friends might enjoy the theme. We had been together for almost 2 years, and while our relationship had its ups and downs like any other, I felt secure in his support. He knew how much this meant to me, how hard I was working to make it special. The speaker became my obsession. I had been using a cheap portable speaker for years, one that barely produced enough volume to fill a single room and had a battery life of maybe 3 hours. For this party, I wanted something better. I researched endlessly, reading reviews and comparing specifications. Finally, I settled on a model that cost $600, a significant investment for me, but one I was willing to make. I saved for 3 months, setting aside money from every paycheck, occasionally picking up extra shifts to reach my goal faster. The day I finally purchased it, I felt an incredible sense of pride. I had worked for this, saved for this, and now I owned something quality that would make my party everything I hoped it would be. I brought it home like it was made of glass, carefully unboxed it, and spent the evening testing it out, marveling at the rich sound quality and powerful volume. My boyfriend was there that evening, and I remember him giving it a cursory glance and saying it seemed nice. That should have been my first warning, but I was too excited to notice the lack of genuine enthusiasm in his voice. As my actual birthday came and went with just a quiet dinner between the two of us, I reminded myself that the real celebration was still ahead. The demanding work period was exhausting, but I pushed through it, keeping my mind focused on the party that awaited me on the other side. Just 2 more weeks, I would tell myself during the long shifts. Just 2 more weeks until everything I had planned would finally come together. It was only a few days before the party when my boyfriend mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that his best friend, the one he had known since childhood, the one who was always around, the one whose opinion seemed to matter more than anyone else's, also had a birthday that same night. The actual night. Not a postponed celebration, but his real birthday. I felt a twist in my stomach when he told me, though I tried to hide it. Of course his friend was still invited, I assured my boyfriend. I had sent the invitation weeks ago. I just wished I had known earlier so I could have acknowledged it properly. Maybe gotten a small cake or card in addition to my own celebration. My boyfriend shrugged it off, saying his friend probably wouldn't make a big deal about it. After all, he reasoned, birthdays were not that important once you reached a certain age. That casual dismissal should have been my second warning. The day of the party arrived with a nervous energy that had been building in me for months. I woke up early, despite having stayed up late the night before doing final preparations. The apartment looked exactly as I had envisioned it, transformed into a 70s dreamscape with carefully placed decorations, warm lighting that gave everything a golden glow, and a table set up with snacks and drinks that I had spent all morning preparing. I had chosen my outfit weeks in advance, a vintage-inspired dress with a geometric pattern, platform shoes that added 3 inches to my height, and accessories that completed the look. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I felt beautiful and confident. This was my night. This was what 6 months of planning and saving had built toward. Guests began arriving right on time. Friends I had not seen in months showed up dressed in their best 70s attire, laughing and complimenting the decorations. The music played at the perfect volume, loud enough to set a mood but not so overwhelming that people could not talk and connect. I floated through the first hour in a state of pure joy, hugging friends, accepting birthday wishes, and feeling like everything was finally coming together exactly as I had hoped. My boyfriend's friend arrived 2 hours late. I noticed immediately because my boyfriend had been checking his phone repeatedly, and I could sense his distraction even as he stood beside me. When his friend finally walked through the door, I pushed aside any frustration about the tardiness and approached him with genuine warmth. After all, it was his actual birthday too, and despite not knowing about it until recently, I wanted to acknowledge that. I wished him a happy birthday and opened opened my arms for a hug. What I received in return was a stiff, perfunctory embrace and an attitude that felt almost hostile. His responses were clipped, his eye contact minimal, and his body language screamed that he did not want to be there. I tried to tell myself that maybe he was tired, maybe he had a long day, maybe I was reading too much into it. So I smiled, excused myself, and returned to my other guests, determined not to let one person's bad mood affect my celebration. For about an hour, things continued normally. I was in the middle of a conversation with a friend from work when I noticed my boyfriend's friend heading out to his car. I did not think much of it. People often kept things in their vehicles, but when he returned carrying a massive speaker that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent, my stomach dropped. He walked right into the center of the party space, set down his speaker with a decisive thud, and began connecting his phone to it. Within seconds, music started blasting from his device, completely overpowering my carefully curated playlist. The song was not bad in itself, but it was jarring, modern, and completely out of sync with the theme I had spent months planning. I looked around at my guests, many of whom had stopped mid-conversation, surprised by the sudden change. Some looked confused, others uncomfortable. I caught my boyfriend's eye across the room, silently pleading with him to handle this. He was best friends with this person. Surely he could explain that this was not appropriate without it becoming a confrontation. My boyfriend walked over to his friend, and they had a brief conversation I could not hear over the music. Finally, thankfully, the music stopped. But before I could feel relieved, I heard his friend announce loudly enough for people nearby to hear that nobody liked the music I had been playing anyway, that the vibes had been terrible, and that one of my close friends had actually asked him to bring his speaker because everyone was bored. I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment and anger. I looked at the friend he had named, and she looked as shocked as I felt, immediately shaking her head and mouthing no to me. Later, she would pull me aside and tell me the truth. He had approached her asking when the old people would leave so the real party could start, and he had brought the speaker entirely on his own initiative. But in that moment, standing there while he implied that my party was boring and that my guests were dissatisfied, I felt humiliated. This was the celebration I had worked so hard for, and it was being criticized and dismissed right in front of everyone. My boyfriend, standing next to his friend, made a comment that cut deeper than anything else that night. He said, loudly enough for me and several others to hear, that I should not worry because my speaker would probably die in 10 minutes anyway. He said it with a laugh, like it was a joke, but I heard the mockery underneath. This was the speaker I had saved for months to buy, the one I had been so proud of, and he was belittling it in front of our friends to make his friend feel better about being asked to turn off his own. I excused myself and went to the bathroom, needing a moment to compose myself. I looked at my reflection, the same reflection that had filled me with confidence just hours earlier, and fought back tears. I gave myself a stern internal lecture. This was still my party. I would not let this ruin the entire night. I would be gracious, mature, and handle this with dignity. When I returned, I tried to reconnect with my guests and salvage the atmosphere. For a few minutes, it seemed to work. But then I noticed my boyfriend's friend gathering a group of the men who had come to the party. They huddled together, and then as a pack, they moved to a different area of the party space. Within moments, his speaker roared to life again, this time at full volume, completely dominating the soundscape and making my own speaker irrelevant. I found my boyfriend and asked him as calmly as I could manage to please shut it down. The party was still supposed to have 2 more hours, and I had planned specific music for the cake cutting that was coming up soon. He looked torn, clearly uncomfortable with being put in the middle, but he went over to his friend and once again, the massive speaker went silent. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. I thought we had finally established the boundary and that the rest of the evening could proceed as planned. I was already mentally preparing myself to be extra gracious during the cake cutting, to publicly acknowledge that it was also his friend's birthday, and make sure he felt included despite the earlier conflicts. But then, about 10 minutes later, my music changed abruptly in the middle of a song. I was across the room and immediately knew something was wrong. I hurried to where I had set up my speaker, intending to simply reconnect my phone and continue with my playlist. As I was checking my phone's Bluetooth settings, trying to figure out what had happened, my boyfriend's friend and another one of our mutual friends walked into the room and sat down near me, both looking at their phones. I watched my boyfriend's friend's screen and saw that he had Spotify open. As I observed, my phone disconnected from my speaker again. The pattern was suddenly, sickeningly clear. I reacted on instinct, reaching over and taking his phone from his hands. He immediately protested, his voice dripping with false innocence, claiming he was not even connected to my speaker. That was when our mutual friend, either out of guilt or frustration, threw his own phone into my boyfriend's friend's lap and announced loudly that my boyfriend's friend had told him to connect to my speaker and change the music. The confirmation of what I already suspected hit me like a physical blow. This was not accidental. This was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate sabotage of my celebration. Something inside me snapped. 6 months of planning, months of saving, hours of preparation, all of it being systematically undermined by someone who could not let a single evening be about anyone but himself. Even though it was not even his party, even though he had been invited as a guest, he had decided that my celebration was not good enough and had taken it upon himself to take control. I told him to get out. I did not not whisper it or say it politely. I told him clearly and forcefully to leave my home. I added that if he had not been acting like such a jerk all evening, he would have been included in the cake cutting, would have been acknowledged and celebrated alongside me. But his behavior had made that impossible. The room went silent. People from other parts of the party had heard the commotion and were now watching. My boyfriend's friend stood up, his face a mixture of shock and anger. He said something else that I barely registered, grabbed his expensive speaker, and left. Several people left with him, friends of his who clearly felt they needed to choose sides in that moment. My boyfriend stood frozen across the room, his face pale. I could see the embarrassment written across his features, the mortification of having a public confrontation at what was supposed to be a celebratory event. But in that moment, I could not bring myself to care about his embarrassment. I was too full of my own hurt and anger. The party continued, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. Some guests tried valiantly to bring back the celebratory mood, and I appreciated their efforts, but we all knew something had broken. When it came time for the cake, fewer people gathered around than I had anticipated. We sang, I blew out candles, and people ate cake, but it felt hollow. The magical evening I had spent half a year planning had been irreparably damaged. After the last guest left and my boyfriend and I were alone in the apartment surrounded by decorations that now felt like mockery, we stood in silence for a long moment. I waited for him to speak first, to say something about what had happened, to acknowledge the disaster the evening had become, but he said nothing, just began helping me clean up with mechanical movements. Finally, I could not stand the silence anymore. I asked him directly what he thought about everything that had happened. His response was careful, measured, and completely unsatisfying. He said he was not taking sides in this situation, that his friend and I were both important to him, and he did not want to be put in the middle, not taking sides, as if this were some neutral disagreement where both parties had equal claim to being right, as if I had not been the one whose carefully planned celebration had been hijacked, as if his friend had not systematically tried to take control of my party, my music, my special evening. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I was too tired to argue, too emotionally drained to push for the support I knew I deserved. We finished cleaning in near silence, and when we finally went to bed, we lay back to back, neither of us reaching for the other. The next day, I woke up still feeling unsettled. My boyfriend had already left for work, and I spent the morning replaying the previous evening in my mind, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. I kept coming back to his comment about my speaker, the way he had mocked something I was proud of to make his friend feel better. That hurt almost more than anything else because it showed where his true loyalties lay. When he came home that evening, his phone was sitting on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. I had never been the type to snoop through his phone. In nearly 2 years together, I had never felt the need, but something drew me to it that day. Maybe intuition, maybe the nagging feeling that there was more to the story than I knew. The phone was unlocked, and a message notification from his friend was visible on the screen. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened the conversation. What I saw made my blood run cold. His friend had sent a message full of anger and confusion, saying he did not know what my problem was, calling the situation nonsense. That alone would have been hurtful enough, the complete lack of self-awareness about his own behavior. But it was my boyfriend's response that truly devastated me. He had agreed with his friend. He had written that he was on his friend's side, that he did not understand what my deal was either. After everything that had happened, after watching his friend systematically try to take over my party, after seeing me humiliated and hurt, my boyfriend had chosen to align himself with the person who had caused all of it. I set the phone down carefully, my hands shaking. I heard the shower turn off, heard my boyfriend moving around in the bathroom, and I stood there trying to decide what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand an explanation for this betrayal. But another part of me felt that this revelation had simply confirmed what I already knew deep down. When it came to choosing between his friend and me, I would always come second. The days following the party passed in a strange fog. My boyfriend and I moved around each other carefully, having surface-level conversations about mundane things while avoiding the massive elephant in the room. He never brought up the party, never asked how I was feeling about everything that had happened. His silence on the subject spoke volumes. I, meanwhile, was trapped in an endless cycle of second-guessing myself. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my mind racing through the events of that evening, analyzing every moment, every decision I had made. Had I overreacted? Should I have handled it differently? Was I the villain in this story? During the day, I would remember specific moments. The way his friend had announced that nobody liked my music, the comment my boyfriend had made about my speaker, the deliberate sabotage of repeatedly taking over my sound system, and I would feel justified in my anger. But then night would come, and doubt would creep in. I had kicked someone out of my party. I had caused a scene. I had embarrassed my boyfriend in front of his friends. I found myself reaching out to friends who had attended the party, not directly asking for their opinions, but trying to gauge their reactions in casual conversation. Most were supportive, expressing shock at his friend's behavior and reassuring me that I had every right to be upset. One friend told me she had almost left early because the atmosphere had become so uncomfortable with the constant power struggles over the music. But a few were more circumspect, gently suggesting that maybe the situation could have been handled more privately. privately, that perhaps a public confrontation had escalated things unnecessarily. These comments fed my doubt, making me question whether my anger had blinded me to better solutions. My boyfriend's continued silence became its own form of communication. By not defending me, by not acknowledging that his friend had behaved inappropriately, by maintaining his position of neutrality, he was making a choice. His refusal to take sides was itself a side, just not mine. I thought about the message I had seen on his phone constantly. The words played on a loop in my mind. He had told his friend that he did not understand what my deal was, as if my reaction had been irrational and inexplicable rather than a reasonable response to having my celebration hijacked. Every time I looked at my boyfriend, I wondered if he was thinking those same thoughts, judging me silently while pretending everything was fine. The speaker, my beautiful speaker that I had saved for so long to purchase, sat unused in the corner of the living room. Every time I looked at it, I remembered the pride I had felt when I bought it and the humiliation I had felt when my boyfriend mocked it. It had become a symbol of something larger: my worth, my priorities, my right to have things that mattered to me respected. About a week after the party, my boyfriend and I finally had the conversation that had been building since that night. It started over something small, a discussion about weekend plans, but quickly evolved into the real issue. I told him how hurt I had been by his comment about my speaker. He looked surprised, as if he had not realized it was hurtful, and said it had just been a joke. When I pressed him on why he thought mocking something I had worked hard for would be funny, he became defensive, saying I was being too sensitive. We moved on to discussing his friend's behavior, and this was where the conversation became truly revealing. My boyfriend maintained that his friend had not meant any harm, that he had just been trying to help make the party more fun. When I pointed out the multiple instances where his friend had deliberately overridden my music choices despite being asked to stop, my boyfriend suggested that maybe my music really had not been what people wanted to hear. That comment landed like a punch. The implication was clear. His friend's assessment that my party was boring had merit, and therefore his attempts to fix it were justified. My 6 months of planning, my carefully curated playlist, my vision for the evening, all of it was being dismissed as inadequate. I asked him directly about the message I had seen on his phone. I admitted to looking at it, accepting that this admission might start its own argument about privacy and trust. His face went through several expressions: surprise, then discomfort, then resignation. He did not try to deny what he had written or claim I had misunderstood. Instead, he tried to explain it away. He said that in the moment, when his friend had sent that message, he had been feeling embarrassed and frustrated. He claimed he had just been venting, saying what his friend wanted to hear to calm the situation down. He insisted that his private message did not reflect his real feelings. But I knew better. The things we say when we think no one else is listening, those are often the truest reflections of our feelings. He had sided with his friend not in the heat of the moment at the party, but later, in the calm aftermath, when he had time to process everything that had happened. That choice told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in his priorities. I asked him what he thought I should have done differently. His answer was telling. He thought I should have just let his friend play his music, should have been more flexible about my plans, should have found a way to compromise that would have kept everyone happy. When I pointed out that I had already compromised multiple times, asking politely for his friend to turn off the music, allowing it to be turned back on briefly, trying to accommodate what I thought were innocent mistakes, he had no response. The conversation ended without resolution. We both retreated to our corners, exhausted and frustrated. But something had shifted in me. The conversation had crystallized certain truths that I could no longer ignore. Over the following days, I did a lot of thinking about patterns in our relationship that I had previously overlooked or excused. I thought about other times when plans I had made were changed at the last minute to accommodate his friends. I remembered instances when my preferences were treated as suggestions, while his were treated as requirements. I recalled moments when I had been expected to be understanding and flexible while he maintained firm boundaries around what he was and was not willing to do. The party had not been an isolated incident. It had been the most dramatic and visible example of a dynamic that had existed throughout our relationship. His needs, his friends, his priorities consistently took precedence over mine. I thought about the life I wanted to live, the partner I wanted to have. I imagined future celebrations, future milestones, future moments that mattered to me. In every scenario I envisioned, I could see this same pattern playing out: my joy being secondary, my plans being flexible, my boundaries being negotiable. I also thought about respect. Not just romantic love or attraction or companionship, but fundamental respect for who someone is and what matters to them. I thought about how a partner who truly respected me would have responded to seeing me hurt and embarrassed at my own celebration. They would have defended me, supported me, acknowledged that what happened was wrong. At minimum, they would not have mocked me to make someone else feel better. The decision, when it finally crystallized in my mind, was not dramatic or impulsive. It was quiet and certain. I could not continue in a relationship where I would always rank second to a friend group, where my right to set boundaries would be seen as inflexibility, where standing up for myself would be treated as causing problems. When I told him, I was calm and clear. I explained that this was not just about the party, although the party had made everything impossible to ignore. This was about fundamental compatibility, about what we each needed from a partner and whether we could provide that for each other. I told him that I needed someone who would stand with me, who would defend my right to be respected, who would not require me to shrink myself or diminish my needs to avoid conflict with others. He was shocked. I think he had assumed we would eventually move past the party incident. That time would smooth over the rough edges and we would return to normal. He tried to argue, to promise he would change, to insist that he did respect me and support me, but we both knew that the words felt hollow after everything that had happened. The actual separation was logistically complicated, as these things always are when two lives have been intertwined for years. But emotionally, I felt a surprising sense of relief. The constant second-guessing, the nagging feeling that I was always being unreasonable, the exhausting work of trying to make myself smaller to fit into the space his friendships left for me, all of it lifted. In the months that followed, I had a lot of time to reflect on everything that had happened. I worked through my feelings in therapy, processing not just the party incident, but the larger patterns in my relationship that it had revealed. I talked through my tendency to doubt my own reactions, to immediately assume I was the problem whenever conflict arose. I examined where that tendency came from and how it had affected my ability to advocate for myself. My friends were overwhelmingly supportive, which helped counter the doubt that still occasionally crept in. The friend who had been falsely accused of requesting the speaker was particularly vocal, telling me multiple times that I had handled a difficult situation as well as anyone could have, and that she had been proud to see me stand up for myself. I also heard, through mutual friends, about how my ex-boyfriend and his friend were characterizing the incident. According to them, I had massively overreacted to a minor situation, had been controlling about my party, and had created drama where none needed to exist. Hearing this version of events was initially painful, but ultimately it reinforced that I had made the right decision. Someone who could experience what I experienced and come away thinking I was the problem in that situation was never going to be a true partner to me. I thought a lot about the question that had haunted me in the immediate aftermath. Was I wrong? And I came to understand that this question itself was flawed. It assumed that there was one objective truth, one clear right and wrong. But what the situation really came down to was boundaries and respect. And I had set reasonable boundaries for my own celebration. I had communicated them clearly. When those boundaries were repeatedly violated, I enforced them. Was my enforcement forceful and public? Yes. But it came after multiple attempts at gentle redirection had failed. I was not wrong to expect my boundaries to be respected, and I was not wrong to enforce them when they were not. More importantly, I was not wrong to expect my partner to support me in that enforcement, rather than undermining me and siding with the person who had repeatedly disrespected me. That was perhaps the core issue, not the specific incident at the party, but what it revealed about the fundamental dynamics of the relationship. I also reflected on the 6 months of planning and saving that had gone into the party. That effort had not been wasted, even though the event itself had been disrupted. The planning process had taught me about my own capabilities, about what I could accomplish when I set my mind to something. The saving had demonstrated my discipline and my ability to defer gratification for something meaningful. These were not small things, and they were not diminished by how the party turned out. The speaker, which I still owned and used regularly, had become a different kind of symbol. It no longer represented my humiliation at the party. Instead, it represented my ability to work toward goals, to invest in things that mattered to me, and to refuse to let others diminish my pride in my accomplishments. Every time I used it, I felt a small surge of satisfaction. As more time passed, I began to rebuild my life in ways that felt authentic to who I was and what I wanted. I reconnected with friends I had somewhat neglected during my relationship, investing more deeply in those friendships. I pursued hobbies and interests that I had put on the back burner. I focused on my work and found new satisfaction in professional accomplishments. Dating again was daunting at first. I was wary and cautious, hyper-aware of potential red flags, constantly analyzing whether someone's actions matched their words. But gradually, I learned to trust my judgment again. I learned to recognize the difference between someone who claimed to respect me and someone who demonstrated it through their actions. I also learned to be more direct about my boundaries from the beginning. Instead of waiting to see if potential problems would arise, I communicated clearly about what I needed and expected. Some people responded well to this directness. Others were put off by it. Those who were put off revealed themselves as incompatible early on, which I came to see as a gift rather than a rejection. The experience of the party and its aftermath had fundamentally changed how I approached relationships. I no longer assumed that conflict meant I was being unreasonable. I no longer automatically deferred to others' comfort at the expense of my own. I no longer accepted not taking sides as a neutral position when someone I cared about was being clearly disrespected. I also became more comfortable with the idea that some people would always see me as the villain in that situation. My ex-boyfriend and his friend certainly did, and probably some of the people who were there that night did as well. I had to make peace with the fact that not everyone would understand my perspective or validate my choices. What mattered was that I understood my own perspective and could validate my own choices. Looking back now, I can see the party as a turning point, not just in that relationship, but in my own development as a person. It was the moment when I learned that standing up for myself might come with costs, but that the cost of not standing up for myself was ultimately higher. It was the moment when I learned that being called difficult or dramatic or controlling by people who wanted me to accept poor treatment said more about them than it did about me. I think about the person I was during those 6 months of planning, excited, hopeful, proud of what I was building. And I think about the person I became in the aftermath, stronger, clearer, more certain of my own worth. Both versions of me have value. Both have contributed to who I am now. Would I do anything differently if I could go back? I have asked myself this question many times. Maybe I would have been less shocked by his friend's behavior, more prepared for the possibility that my celebration could be disrupted. Maybe I would have had a clearer conversation with my boyfriend beforehand about expectations and boundaries. Maybe I would have enforced those boundaries earlier in the evening rather than giving multiple chances. But I would not apologize for standing up for myself. I would not shrink my reaction to make others more comfortable. I would not accept the characterization that wanting my own party to proceed as planned was controlling or that enforcing my boundaries was creating drama. Those were not my failures. They were failures of empathy and respect on the part of others. So was I wrong to kick him out of my party? After all this reflection, all this analysis, all this growth, my answer is clear: no. I was not wrong to expect respect at my own celebration. I was not wrong to enforce boundaries after they were repeatedly violated. I was not wrong to feel hurt and angry when my careful plans were systematically undermined. And I was not wrong to end a relationship where my partner consistently prioritized someone else's comfort over my dignity. The real question was never whether I was wrong to kick him out. The real question was whether I was willing to accept a relationship where my needs were always secondary, where my right to set boundaries would be questioned, where standing up for myself would be treated as the problem rather than the solution. I answered that question by choosing myself, by deciding that I deserved better, by walking away from a situation that was never going to give me what I needed. That decision was not easy, and it did not come without pain and doubt and second-guessing, but it was right. To anyone who has ever found themselves in a similar situation, wondering if they overreacted, if they should have been more understanding, if they were the problem, I want you to hear this. Your boundaries matter. Your right to be treated with respect matters. Your worth is not determined by how much you are willing to tolerate. Sometimes standing up for yourself will cost you relationships. Sometimes people will paint you as the villain for refusing to accept poor treatment. Sometimes you will be called dramatic or sensitive or difficult, but those labels are often just tools used by people who benefited from you being smaller, quieter, more accommodating. I spent months planning a party that was important to me. I saved money for equipment I was proud of. I created an experience I had dreamed about. When all of that was disrespected and undermined, I defended it. There is no version of that story where I am the villain, regardless of how others might choose to tell it. I have moved forward with my life, carrying the lessons from that experience, but not the shame or doubt. I know now that I am capable of standing up for myself even when it is hard, even when it costs me, even when others do not understand. And that knowledge is worth more than any relationship that required me to be small.